What is up, everybody? My name is Zach Moss. Although I am wearing a bro tank, I'm actually a secret nerd. I'm currently getting my PhD studying international conflict. The technical term is diplomacy and international relations. With that said, there was just a debate with the Democratic candidates, and I really wanted to go over what their foreign policy looks like based off of what they were saying in the debate, and kind of what can we draw from that. And this is really relevant because the US military budget takes up half of the United States' spending. And on top of that, there's countless soldier and civilian lives are at stake as well. So what is the leader of the free world going to do about this? Well, let's check it out. Today, I really wanted to focus on Cory Booker, and I'm going to create a little series analyzing what each different candidate had said. Unless, of course, they said like 2 seconds worth, in which case it's probably not even worth going over. But nonetheless, I digress. Let's jump into it.
Senator Booker, there are about 14,000 U.S. service members in Afghanistan right now. If elected, will they still be in Afghanistan by the end of your first year in office?
Well, first of all, I want to say very clearly that I will not do foreign policy by tweet, as Donald Trump seems to do all the time. A guy that literally tweets out that we're pulling our troops out before his generals even know about it is creating a dangerous situation for our troops in places like Afghanistan. And so I will bring our troops home, and I will bring them home as quickly as possible. But I will not set during a campaign an artificial deadline. I will make sure we do it expeditiously, we do it safely, to not create a vacuum that's ultimately going to destabilize the Middle East and perhaps create the environment for terrorism and for extremism to threaten our nation.
Okay, so there's a couple different things that we can take away from what he had said. So he had gone over artificial deadlines, power vacuums, and destabilizing the Middle East. That's kind of the generalized talking points. And so there's a couple different things to take away from this. Number one, his idea of an artificial deadline. We can't say when we're going to leave. That is true. There's usually a couple different reasons why you don't want to say. Number one, a lot of times with Islamist extremists, which is actually what my area of focus is, studying diplomacy and international relations, there's a policy that they would follow, which is to withhold their violence and their offensive operations until the United States were to leave, or really any sort of occupying force. Then, once we leave, they will then use all of their resources and launch a mass offensive operation in order to take as much land, which is where that idea of a power vacuum comes from. The second idea is sometimes, believe it or not, a group will follow an ideology or a part of an ideology created by Osama bin Laden, which says, no, make sure they don't leave, ironically. Make sure they stay. And so a lot of times when you give an artificial deadline, sometimes they will increase their offensive operations and use things like suicide bombers, which kind of forces our hand to stay there. You might be wondering, well, why would they want us to stay? That's kind of ridiculous. Well, yeah, it is kind of ridiculous, but the idea is to drain the United States' resources and weaken public morale, and so we'd never want to come back. Osama bin Laden actually used Vietnam as a case study as to why different Islamist extremist organizations should do that. And Osama bin Laden also said that we being the United States, should completely withdraw from the Middle East. And his idea was to have multiple wars that the United States is engaged with in the Middle East, drain our resources, and have us withdraw everywhere. And he kind of created that idea after the war in Afghanistan between the Afghanis and the Soviet Union and other Islamist extremist organizations. He was also mad because the United States during the 1990s was occupying Saudi Arabia, which is where he is from, but I digress. So yeah, artificial deadlines, generally not a good thing. However, one thing that Booker did say is he had said power vacuum specifically. Is there some sort of justification in that? Yeah, that is true. But in politics, using the term power vacuum is generally used by people who never wish to leave. That is what is a bit concerning to me. For example, what's his face? Lindsey Graham, the warmongering antichrist that he is, he had used this as a reference to 2018 when President Trump said he was going to leave different countries in the Middle East like Iraq. And it was also used in 2015 by Dick Cheney, who was criticizing the Obama administration from trying to leave the Middle East, specifically Iraq and Afghanistan as well. In addition to that, Hillary Clinton on the Democrat side used that as a reason for why we shouldn't leave particular countries in the Middle East like Afghanistan. And Hillary Clinton was also the one that had ruled in favor of overthrowing Gaddafi in Libya, which created a whole, well, that was a literal power vacuum where everybody, well, everything went to shit. Let's just be honest about it. That's what happened. So it sounds like the idea that Cory Booker is making is that we should plan to eventually get out. However, it's nothing in the near future. But I have a big problem with that. And my problem is this. What will change in 4 years or what will change in 8 years that has not already happened? Now, what I mean by that is the United States is currently occupying multiple countries. We all know that. Statistically, occupation leads to further public dissent in that area and will increase the violence against the United States. And in addition to that, that's actually the case with multiple countries that are occupying foreign land. For example, it's also the case with the Israelis and the Palestinians. It's even the case with Ethiopia. Believe it or not, Ethiopia is occupying areas of Somalia. And because of that, it increased the amount of people in Somalia that hated Ethiopia. And so they actually joined Islamist extremist organizations like Al-Shabaab to fight Ethiopia. So what is my point here? My point is that 4 more years, 8 more years, it might not make any sort of difference. All we're wasting is lives, and we are wasting resources. Already we've stayed in Afghanistan for 20 years. We've lost over 500,000 people, both soldiers and civilians. We spent roughly $5 trillion on the wars. And in Iraq alone, there's been 4 million people displaced, meaning there are 4 million people who lost their homes and who are homeless. 4 million people. So the question is, should we stay there? No, we should not stay there. It is not helping this situation. This is the part that really frustrates me. In academia and media, they usually don't answer the how. How are we going to leave? And a lot of times they can't answer that, and so they just say, well, I guess we're stuck here forever. No. I don't buy that, even though these candidates had a minute to answer what are they going to do about issues in the Middle East or, some crap like that. They could have at least said steps that they were going to take. With that said, I would have argued different policies that I would have enacted in order to get out of the Middle East. So I would have started with something along the lines of, yes, we shouldn't be setting artificial deadlines. However, we need to take steps in order to get out of these countries. So then we can use this money for the American people. We can save troops' lives. We can get out of these wars. We can make sure there's not a power vacuum. And I do, in fact, believe that we can do that. And then with the other, 50 seconds, I would have said different policy recommendations. For example, number 1, increase negotiations with rival factions so they can engage in the local political process. And with that, number 2, ensure everyone has rights and freedoms in that area. And so specific case studies that I'm looking at here is with Afghanistan. And a lot of times the government forces will crack down on a lot of the people, and so they have to use violence in order to achieve some sort of political means that they can't do peacefully. And that's the same case with the Palestinians as well, and a number of other groups, like even Syria, for example. In Afghanistan specifically, a lot of the tribal land is almost, in a way, sovereign, and they struggle to get involved in the political process in Afghanistan because a lot of times they don't have voting rights. It's like, yeah, okay, they don't have voting rights, so they're going to use violence in order to achieve political means. So that's 1, and that's 2. Number 3, increase multilateral action with the international community and decrease unilateral action. Essentially what that means is make more countries play an active role in these wars so the United States can kind of take a step back and we can all remain even. Granted, the United States has NATO and some other different groups that are involved in these areas. However, we should be making this an international issue where all countries participate. Granted, there are some setbacks with that. For example, the more countries involved, the more interest involved, and it gets a little bit more complex. But what's the alternative? The alternative is that the United States spearheads this alone, and then we're stuck with this issue alone. Number 4, review the foreign government's troop training programs. A lot of the programs training foreign troops is a bit of a failure, so let's kind of review that. 5, increase the intelligence and accountability behind our drone strike program to limit the number of civilian casualties. A lot of the reason why there's so much dissent internationally against the United States is because drone strikes will kill families, friends, so on and so forth. And so when there is a group, say the people in Pakistan and Afghanistan that border that are Pashtuns, and I believe 80% of the Taliban is composed of Pashtuns, when they're minding their own business and then their daughter gets killed or their son gets killed, yeah, they're going to want to go against the United States. And so if we're trying to counteract a lot of the hate, we might want to review the drone strike program. There are some benefits of the drone strike program, of course, like we keep troops' lives out of danger, but you are also then putting their lives in more danger if you're creating more enemies. And with all this said, I would say 6, I'd begin my policy on the first day in office, so we leave the Middle East and use that money for the American people, like the Green New Deal, increase different investments into the VA. I know that was way more than a minute, but this is just to get the ball rolling, get people's ideas flowing about what we could do. So should we stay in the Middle East? No. Should we take steps? Yes. What are we going to do to get out? And that is what people should be focusing on. Overall, if I were to grade Booker, I give him probably about like a C+, B-. Anyway, thank you guys for listening to this. If this is on YouTube where you guys are listening to this, please give it a like or a subscribe. If this is on TV right now and that's how you guys are listening to it, thank you very much. I will see you all later.